This is a 97 Ford Explorer, 4-wheel drive, 4-liter. Has a problem with the headlight switch falling out of the dash. I went ahead and blocked the rear wheel, and the vehicle's on a level grade. I'll be pulling the gear shifter down to the lowest gear to help get that panel off. This is a problem that's happened. It's flopping around inside there and the knobs come off of it. So I need to get to the back of this panel. I'll start by taking these two screws out of the center bezel covering the radio. It overlaps on this panel. Then come down underneath. Take this screw out. They're all 7mm or 9/32. Skip past the OBD2 connector. Take two out on the hood latch release and one out next to the console. I'm just using a nut driver handle and a short ratchet if I need it. And splice this into taking the hood latch loose. Now there's clips that's holding it here. Just go ahead and push back on this and pop the clips loose. They're just kind of wedges in there. Kind of be careful with them or they'll break these studs, plastic studs or something off. Now I'm into the knee bolster. It's just some reinforcement to keep your knees out from under the guts. Take these two 8mm out of the top and loosen up the 3 across the bottom and get access to these 7mm behind it. Now I've pulled this front bezel with the stereo out far enough to get to a 7mm bolt behind it. Just far enough to get to it. It is a little shorter and different than the others, so you might keep it separate. The screw is. Now I'm going to take these 3 bolts out of the instrument cluster trim. I'm going to go ahead and stick the key in and turn the switch to the halfway position. Pull the shifter down to first gear. I'm also tilting the tilt wheel down. Now I'm going to pull this plastic from around the speedometer trim. It's got clips still retaining it in place. Just got to jerk them loose real easy and just back it up the dash a little bit. And then get over to this headlight switch and unplug it if you need to. Looking from above the headlight switch into the bezel. Stick a screwdriver down there and latch that connector to the interior light control and dimmer switch for the interior lights. It takes some finagling to get it out of there, but it's out. You gotta pop this little thing up over the dash as you're pulling it back, and then wiggle it up out of there after the wires are unhooked. Looks like the mounting holes for the headlight switch is broken off in the trim. They're not wanting to put any money into it per se, so I think I'll just drill a hole on through it, put a couple of screws back into it. That's the dimmer switch, and that's the headlight switch connector. Feel free to unhook the battery after you pull the gear shifter down. The only issue I had was kicking the signals on and off while I was doing it. They're about done anyway. Just make sure the ignition switch isn't turned all the way on before you unhook the battery, if you feel like you need to. Make sure it's at the halfway position and nothing slid up on the dash. That's nice. This is the light up display to show what position the switch is in. That's how it's set on there. Took a small drill bit and drilled a hole through each one of the broken off stands. Had to loosen this dimmer switch, just about remove it to get a straight shot on this bottom one. And that's what I'm looking at to the front side. I'm going to take a little bigger drill bit since I'm using bevel headed, like 1/4 inch fine threaded screws. And I'll bevel that hole, make a little taper in it by using a drill bit approximate size of this head. Really didn't do much more than just kind of scratch the surface. You don't remove too much plastic. That is what's going to be holding the switch, that, and probably put some adhesive around it on the back side. And the holes I made are just a little bit smaller than the screw. They'll get stuck in there, so it's pretty solid. I'll thread them on through. And these tubes, I'll ream them out so that it just barely slides through what's left of them to keep the distance aspect to the front of it. So I won't be tightening these down and pull these ears in and break it off. If you had to, you could shim that up with washers if these are busted. Small, like rivet washers. Put a little dab of super glue underneath the stands. And I had the screws run down to just a 1/16 inch, and then went ahead and threaded them down to pull those stands down. So they're almost a permanent resident. I'll stick a switch on there and put the lock nuts on it, and that'll sandwich the two together. Put some weather strip adhesive on the front of it. Now put the nuts on the back of it. Might put some adhesive or Loctite or something on these threads to help hold the little nuts from backing off. Okay, the nuts are on it. Let's run them down. Make sure your dowel pins on the face of the switch settle into the plastic. Just keep any glue off of the actual turning of the switch if you put any on it. Let that baby solid. the screws gray. It's sticking up a little bit, but you really can't take away too much plastic or it'll bust clear through it. Good. Put the knob back on it. And I'll stick it back in there. Good enough. First, start this panel off by dropping it down the steering column. And get this bottom has a spike on it. And walk it down near to where it needs to be. Then come up to the top and push this down, this spike past the dash. To give you some room to work with it. Now that that's there, we'll go ahead and plug the headlight and dimmer switch in. The dimmer switch is up there, so you'll want to watch it through the trim panel as you're pushing it up on there. Kind of had to wiggle it to lift those fingers up to get them to latch on. Now go ahead and plug the headlight switch in. Back down into position. And line the slots up with the clips all around it and push them in. And put this panel screws all back in, the 3 up here and the 3 hidden ones, one under the knee bolster, one behind the stereo bezel, and one over here under this tin knee bolster. Once you get the screws put back into this gray trim piece, feel free to put it back in park and take the key clear out of it if the chimes are annoying and you've left the battery hooked up. And go ahead and slide this stereo and trim back into place. Put those 2 screws back in it. And put the 5/16 headed bolts back into this knee panel. And tighten all those back down. There's 3 across the bottom and 2 on the top. Be sure not to cross-thread them, they're easily cross-threaded. And put the lower trim cover back on. These clips are kind of sharply angled, and it's got to insert into there at that angle. And put the hood latch screws back in it, and the other screws that's holding it up there. There's 4 of them left. And any other panels you may have taken loose. Yeah, it's better than factory. Good enough.